for what he's done. I hear it in his voice, it's in the conversations, it's like he feels really bad. He's asked me over and over, how's Miss Edith, how's she doing, is she okay? He really, even now, he worries about her. You know, he does genuinely care about her, and this was, he doesn't understand why he did it, but
He accepts responsibility.
he does accept responsibility.
When he was living at your house, was he helpful around the house?
Absolutely.
He was too young to have a job, correct?
He did work anyway. He would mow lawns for people. As a matter of fact, he was taking care of Miss Edith's yard. They actually ended up working out a deal where he was mowing her, I don't know how many acres she's got, and they kind of worked it out where he could ride his dirt bike over there if he mowed her, but he always, all the neighbors would call up and say, hey, is Randy John available? Can he come and help me with this? Can he help me with that? He was very helpful in the neighborhood.
Was he helpful around the house?
Absolutely. Oh,
Did
yeah.
he follow household rules?
Yes. He can cook, he can clean, he can do a lot of things.
Once Jesse is released from whatever period of incarceration the court deems appropriate, will you be there for him?
Absolutely. If I'm alive still.
Will you help support him kind of getting back on his feet into the community?
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like Judge Herndon to know about Jesse?
Just that he isn't the person that did this act in a natural way. He's not this guy. I think personally he panicked or something. I can't explain what happened. But he's a person that you love, you care. You liked having him around. He was a good person. He is a good person. And, I mean, I care about Miss Edith too, I really do. And I don't know what's really fair here. I was myself recently attacked, and for me personally, the way I felt better is to have the person get help. Because I think people who are in that situation, they need help. And prior to him, this incident happened, I was already reaching out for help. I called the police a couple different times trying to get help for him. I called the school counselor trying to get help for him. But nobody seems to, you know, that end of things, they failed. And you know, I really believe had he gotten the help that he needed then, he would not be here right now. I mean, I really believe that.
You mentioned earlier, I think, that he did some counseling when he was much younger. Is
Yeah.
that right?
And it really did help, and that's why I was trying again. I reached out to the school counselor because the school counselor told me they had the guidance counselors. That they have a person that did counseling, and I was, you know, waiting. He would come home, and I said, "Hey, did you get to talk to this counselor yet? Did you get to talk to the counselor yet?" "No, not yet, Grandma. Not yet, Grandma." And then I'm waiting and I'm waiting. I keep calling the school, but even the guidance counselor, she never returned calls. She wouldn't return emails. I really struggled to communicate with this person, and you know, so and then she finally told me, "Oh, that person is no longer doing it." Like several months later.
When he was in counseling before, why did that stop?
Because the school year ended. It was in the school.
So it's not like he declined to participate
No.
or anything like that?
No, he actually believed that it helped him.
Okay. And when you say you noticed in the months leading up to his arrest that he was struggling, can you kind of describe what you observed yourself?
Well, the one thing that really kind of stood out for me that he was struggling was because he hadn't used to lie, and he didn't used to take things and didn't do different things. His behavior was excellent before. And then all of a sudden, he was sitting at the dining room table, and I said to him, what is going on? Why are you behaving like this? I don't get it. And he says, why does my mother hate me so much? That's what came out. So then I realized he's in pain. That's what I realized at that point in time. That's when I started trying to get help from him, because that's the seed of what's going on. And then after that event, losing his sister really tipped him upside down. I mean, he just went, and he even told me, I said, why do you keep trying to get video screens? Why do you keep getting video screens? What's going on with this? What's going on with this? And he said, Grandma, when I'm watching the videos, I don't think about my sister. It helps give me a break from thinking about my sister. I'm missing my sister. So that's what he was doing. He was kind of using the videos as...
What type of videos are you talking about?
He liked all kinds of videos. It's not just pornography. The pornography happened in the very end, well, like that, but, and I'll admit, he got introduced to pornography, actually, from his father. And that happened when he was in the 4th grade. And he got in trouble for being on a website at school that was pornographic. It was something that, I think what it was, my son spelled out the words to him, is what my grandson told me. And then he went to school and he typed those letters in, and that's what it was. And it wasn't, I think he told me it was kind of, well, the school told me it was kind of like boy on boy type of pornography, but that's like his first thing. But he was also watching videos where, you know, like dirt bikes and funny things, and I guess pretty much, I mean, a lot of us do it. I do it now. I find myself scrolling through my phone just because I'm bored and I don't have anything better to do with my time. And so it's an escape.
Do you ever have any concern about him abusing any kind of drugs or alcohol or anything like that?
No. I was more concerned with him possibly, because he was like taking my phone, he was taking my father's phone, his great-grandfather, whom I take care of. He was helping take care of his great-grandfather as well. He was taking our phones and things like that. My kids, I am proud to say, none of my children abused drugs or alcohol. They all finished school, and 2 of my kids were college educated. One of my sons has died a few years ago, so that's another thing that I'm experiencing when, like, him going away, I'm feeling the loss all over again. I'm like, I'm losing another child.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Any questions from the state?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Glenn. Right, anyone else?
Are you sure you don't want to say anything? Do you want to say anything? Okay. No, Your Honor, nothing further.
Okay, all right, state anything further?
Just argument.
Okay, go ahead.
May I remain seated, Your Honor?
You may.
Especially with the Zoom, it makes it a little easier for them to be able to hear.
That's fine.
Your Honor, I just want to review briefly some of the testimony the court heard and make a few comments on that was presented at the first portion of the sentencing hearing. And also, for the record, Mr. Mills and I agree the defendant has 237 days credit to include his DJJ time. So, Your Honor, the court heard testimony from Detective Paxton that detailed his and Detective Hardigan's investigation in this case. And throughout that testimony and the portions of the defendant's interview that was played for the court, it showed a series of deliberate and violent choices by the defendant that ended up endangering the health, the safety, and really the life of Miss Pulliam in this case, and ultimately caused significant physical harm to her. Miss Pulliam considered the defendant to be a friend, that he was one of the kids in the neighborhood that she showed kindness to even the day prior to this incident, sitting and talking with the defendant. And with this friendship, the defendant gained knowledge about Miss Pulliam's life, including the fact that she lived alone. He had awareness of when she was alone versus when family or friends were visiting based on vehicles in the neighborhood. He knew the layout of her home, and he was close enough with Miss Pulliam that he helped teach her how to use her iPad, and knew that she had that device in her home that he would be able to access. Ultimately, through the investigation, when the defendant was identified as the perpetrator and interviewed by law enforcement, he initially denied entering her home, attacking her, and then ultimately, when confronted with photos of her injuries and the DNA evidence, little by little started making admissions to law enforcement. There were 3 portions of this that we played specifically for the court. The defendant, in his interview, described heavy surveillance by his grandmother. This is consistent with the information in the mitigation report that the defendant's grandmother tried to provide structure and responsibility for the defendant in that home, and that he, at one point in his interview to law enforcement, stated he wanted to get out of the house where he was heavily watched by cameras to go to a place where he wasn't under such control. And so that was one of his choices here in leaving his home and entering the victim's home. Throughout his interview, he begins to admit to entering Miss Pulliam's home, leaving, going back home, coming back, going back home, back and forth multiple times, all of this happening while Ms. Pulliam, who's 91 years old, is sleeping in her bed and is unaware. She did not give permission or consent for the defendant to enter her home, never mind in the middle of the night. The defendant admitted to using that device, the iPad, to watch pornography, which law enforcement later determined include pornography with elderly adults. And what is clear from the testimony presented to the court is that these circumstances, the defendant being in this home, escaping that control, watching the pornography, caused him to be sexually aroused and shows the court his sexual intent for why he entered the home and why he ended up attacking Ms. Pulliam. During his description of the physical attack, it shows his recklessness and the extreme danger that he was putting her in through his choices. This is one of the clips played to the court, that he covered her face with a pillow so she couldn't see him, but he held it there so she couldn't pull it away. This is a very dangerous decision by the defendant that could have led to her being suffocated. Ms. Pulliam was in fairly good health for her age, but that could have not been the case. And so that decision was made by the defendant to risk her life in that moment without any regard for her safety or her well-being. She was strong enough to fight back. The defendant, this was described to the court through both the testimony provided by the victim, but also through the defendant's admissions, that he then had to take a number of actions to restrain her so he could regain control over the situation. This included covering her eyes and mouth with his hands so she couldn't see him, many attempts to try to hold her down. At one point in one of the clips we played for the court, the defendant states that he was looking for something to wrap her arms up with to physically restrain her, and that he repositioned her, flipping her on her stomach where he could be on top of her in order to have complete control and power over her physically in that moment. And it was during that positioning that he committed the sexual battery of the digital penetration of the victim. And what is described by the defendant's own admission shows this was not him simply panicking, but that there were a number of very intentional decisions he made that inflicted harm on Ms. Pulliam, who was just asleep in her bed, once he entered her bedroom while he was inside the home after watching the pornography. The defendant then describes, after the sexual battery, even additional steps that were intentionally made to prevent him from being identified or to cover up his crime that he had committed, including covering her face again with a pillow so that she couldn't see him when he left the room, and then seeing he had blood on his hands, washing that off. He describes that to law enforcement as well. The court also saw photographs and the video of the body camera showing Ms. Pulliam's lacerations and bruising, and heard the statement from the victim's family about how this has impacted her health and how it has impacted the family to have to experience learning about this attack and helping Ms. Pulliam process so late in her own life. I just want to comment on the report by Dr. I think it's Williamson. The doctor describes diagnoses of ADHD, depression, and impulse control disorder, but does not describe a severe mental health diagnosis that is so pressing or so dire that it outweighs the need for incarceration in this case. Any suggested treatment, including sex offender treatment, can be in part sought in the Department of Corrections, but also ordered as a condition of probation to follow any incarceration in this case. And if I would like an opportunity to address any other sanctions that may be requested by defense after, if that is requested in this case. But specifically, what the state's requesting the court to consider is a significant term of incarceration, which would be the only appropriate sentence to punish the actions the defendant took in this case. He harmed Ms. Pulliam in the course of this attack and the sexual battery, and this was a woman that only ever showed him loving kindness throughout his time living in the neighborhood with her. So we're asking the court to sentence the defendant to adjudicate him on both counts, to sentence him to 15 years Department of Corrections on count 1 with a $100 fine plus court costs, $100 cost of prosecution, $100 cost of defense, and a $50 public defender application fee. I believe Mr. Mills is appointed. And on count 2, which is the punishable by life offense, we're requesting the court to consider no less than 30 years in the Department of Corrections, or higher if the court determines that's appropriate, but to follow a sentence of incarceration if it is not life to include sex offender probation, with specific treatments that can help monitor the defendant upon any reentry into the community and protect them.
Right, Mr. Mills.
Your Honor, Mr. Stone is before the court. He was 14 years old when this event happened. He had absolutely no prior criminal history on his score sheet whatsoever. He's never even been on probation with the Department of Juvenile Justice, obviously never been committed to a juvenile program. His brain was nowhere near fully developed when this incident happened and is still probably 10 years off from that being the case. He had a relatively difficult childhood. He had no father figure in his life whatsoever. And certainly none of this is an excuse or a justification by any means for what happened. He is remorseful about what happened. You've heard testimony about that. He pled guilty. But he, lost contact with his sister, I believe shortly before this happened. He very minimal contact with his mother, and he was essentially raised by his paternal grandmother. Despite all that, he's done fairly well in school. He got ahead of grade, made pretty good grades, A's and B's, I believe it was. We believe that that indicates that he would be amenable to supervision as well as specialized sex offender treatment. As the state points out, he does suffer from depression and ADHD. And obviously there are plenty of people that have depression and ADHD that never get involved in anything like this, but that combined with his childhood certainly doesn't help. As a 14-year-old boy with, again, no father figure in his life, he appears to be somewhat get addicted to pornography and things of that nature on the internet. I'm sure that didn't help this situation. Dr. Williamson does indicate that he would benefit from specialized psychiatric, psychological, and sex offender treatment. The Department of Juvenile Justice is well equipped to handle that with a 14-year-old child. The Department of Corrections, it's our position, would not be. They're accustomed to dealing with adults and even teenagers that are older, in the neighborhood of 17 or 18 years old. Mr. Stone would be in a better environment if he were around kids his age and not institutionalized with people in prison, other adult sex offenders in prison, and things of that nature. None of that is going to benefit him in growing up and growing out of this and being rehabilitated. Certainly there has to be some punishment involved, and we acknowledge that, but there does need to be, we believe, some element of rehabilitation that he's not going to get in the state prison system as a 14-year-old sex offender. Your Honor has probably the widest range of sentencing options that I've ever seen before. You could sentence him to juvenile sanctions. You could put him in a high-risk program and retain jurisdiction through his 21st birthday. The court, that's what we would ask the court to do. If the court does not believe that's appropriate, Mr. Stone would qualify as a youthful offender based on these charges. If the court is inclined to send him to prison, we would ask that it be as a youthful offender with a portion in prison followed by a portion on sex offender probation so that he can get the treatment that he needs in an outpatient type setting. He scores, I believe, around 135 months. If the court is not inclined to give him juvenile sanctions or youthful offender sentence, we believe that that would be a rather substantial punishment, almost as many months as he was alive at the time of this incident, to be followed by probation. Your Honor, sentencing him to 30 years or 40 years or 50 years in prison for his first ever arrest. We agree that there does need to be some punishment here, but he's 14 years old and has never been arrested before, so we just ask the court to have mercy on him.
All right, thank you. I do not think juvenile sanctions or youthful offender sanctions are appropriate under these circumstances. His actions are egregious, and the victim in this case is lucky to be alive under these circumstances. State, did you want? I am going to sentence him to prison, followed by a lengthy term of sex offender probation. I don't know if you want to be heard as far as conditions now or after I impose the DOC sentence.
I believe the standard sex offender conditions would be sufficient. That would include treatment and as well as no contact or internet use without the risk assessment. So I believe that would encompass everything that's needed.
Okay, so once I announce my sentence, if there's something additional either side thinks that I should address, I'll be glad to do that. All right, Mr. Stone, this is unfortunate for you, for the victim, for both of your families. I'm going to start with count 2. It's a burglary of a dwelling with a battery, which is punishable by up to life in prison. You're adjudicated guilty and sentenced to 25 years in the Department of Corrections. That's going to be followed by 30 years of sex offender probation. You're going to have to follow the sex offender probation conditions set forth in 948.30, which includes sex offender treatment, a variety of other things, including polygraphs, no use of the internet without a risk assessment, no contact with children under the age of 18. I don't know that that's going to be applicable in this case, but I assume all those are still going to apply. You cannot have any contact with the victim in this case, which means that no phone contact, third-party contact, no contact in any manner whatsoever, no electronic contact, no writing. You can't go within 500 feet of where she's living, and you can't go within 100 feet of a vehicle that she's in, and that will be during the entirety of your DOC sentence and the probation. You're going to have to register. It is a sex offender, right? Not sex predator?
I believe it's sex offender due to the nature of count 1.
Okay. You are going to have to register as a sex offender pursuant to 943.0435. Let me address count 1 now before I continue, because the conditions are going to be the same. On count 1, which is a sexual battery, you are adjudicated guilty. You're sentenced to a term of consecutive probation to the prison sentence on count 2. So it's 25 years in the Department of Corrections, followed by 30 years of sex offender probation. The probation on count 1 is for 15 years of sex offender probation, concurrent with the 30-year sex offender probation sentence on count 2, which includes all the conditions of sex offender probation outlined in 948.30, including the no contact provision that I just announced, will be applicable to both counts. Additionally, you do have to register as a sexual offender pursuant to 943.0435 for both counts. Additionally, you must complete a mental health evaluation. You must make arrangements to have the mental health evaluation within 60 days of your release from the Department of Corrections. Thereafter, you must comply with any recommended treatment or counseling. You must also enroll in an anger management course within 60 days of your release from the Department of Corrections, and you must successfully complete it on the first attempt. Once again, you're not to have any contact with the victim. It relates to both counts. On each, actually on count 2, you're going to receive credit time served in the amount of 237 days. There's a $500 fine plus mandatory court cost, $100 cost of prosecution, $100 cost of defense, $50 public defender application fee, and you must provide a DNA sample for the FDLE database. As I said, the DOC sentence of 25 years is followed by consecutive sex offender probation on count 1 and count 2. So, what do I need to address as far as conditions of probation from the state's perspective?
I would request that the court add that the defendant must comply with all registration requirements as a sexual offender as a condition of the probation.
Okay. And I announced the statute, but you must comply with all sex offender reporting requirements pursuant to statute. And that will be applicable to count 1, the 15 years, and count 2, the 30 years following the DOC. Mr. Mills, what else do I need to address related to any conditions of probation or the conditions of the sentence?
Nothing further from the defense, Your Honor.
Okay. You do have 30 days to appeal. All right, is there anything else that needs to be addressed?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Mills, did you want the evaluation of Dr. Williamson in the court file?
Yes, please, Your Honor.
Because I wasn't sure if it had been filed yet.
Right, thank you. That
All
would be
right.
perfect.
And for the record, I provided the court the score sheet in advance.
Yes, and I have the score sheet here, and I know Mr. Mills referenced the lowest permissible, which was reflected in the score sheet that I had. You're more than welcome to review it, Mr. Mills, if you want to.
No, thank you, Your Honor.
See it?
We didn't have an objection to it.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I be excused?
Yes, ma'am.